Hi there! Today in the lab I'm going to actually be doing a little bit of experimenting because I want to see if I can make some no-sew fabric out of a lot of my fabric scraps. If you've seen some of my other videos, you know I've been doing a lot of videos on some projects that you can make from denim pieces, and I will link to those in the description box. I've made some beads and notebook covers and a lot of different things that you can check out if you're interested. So I've got my good fabric scissors. I've already cut some pieces of fusible interfacing just to do the testing on. This is going to be kind of a two-step process. So the first step for all of my samples is going to be the same. And what I want to do is I'm going to take one of my pieces of fusible interfacing. So there's just a little bit of adhesive on the one side of this little square that I've cut. And I'm just going to start picking through my little pieces of fabric here and laying them out onto the fusible side of the interfacing. So if you're not familiar with that, it'll be sort of the bumpy side that has the glue on it. So I want to lay out my pattern, and I do want to overlap my pieces just a little bit. And the other thing I want to make sure of is that all of my pieces are making at least some contact with my fusible interfacing. So they don't have to touch it everywhere, but you do want to make sure that your pieces are coming in contact with your interfacing so that they will at least have a little bit of adhesion once they're ironed on. And I'm just using the pieces kind of as they are. You can certainly cut them down if you want to, and I may end up doing that in a minute here. You can also decide whether you want to really clean cut your edges or whether you want some of that fraying. I'm going to leave some of the fraying just to see how it comes out with some of these tests that I'm going to run. You can use all different sizes of pieces. You don't want to use really tiny pieces, I don't think. Just because the integrity of the finished piece kind of depends on everything sticking together. So you don't want to use a ton of tiny little pieces, but you can use some smaller pieces. And the other thing you want to make sure of is that you're covering all of the interfacing. So you don't want pieces of that kind of peeking out anywhere. All right, so there's my arrangement, and I have all of my pieces are making a little bit of contact with the interfacing underneath, and there's plenty of overlap as well, and you can see that it's overlapping on the outside edge and the pieces are overlapping each other, and I don't have any interfacing peeking through. So now I'm going to take my iron and I'm just going to follow the instructions for fusing the interfacing. So when you're finished ironing, all of your pieces should be tacked onto the interfacing. And I'm just going to go ahead and carefully trim off my excess around my interfacing just to clean it up. So I'm going to be running 5 different tests, so I need to make 4 more samples just like this one. If you're new to my channel, I just wanted to say welcome and introduce myself. My name is Cindy, and I do a lot of craft tutorials using recycled and repurposed materials. So if you like that kind of content, I hope you'll consider subscribing to this channel and giving this video a thumbs up so YouTube will know to send more of my videos your way. I try to post a new video every week, and if you'd like to receive my newsletter so you never miss one of my videos, you can find a place to sign up in the description box. So I've got my 5 samples prepared here, and you can see that on all of them there are plenty of loose spots, but everything is tacked down and attached to my interfacing on the back side. So I'm going to start with my first sample, and I have a little cheat sheet of notes of what the test is going to entail, but I want to just mark each of my samples. So this is going to be sample number 1. And for this sample, I'm just going to apply some matte Mod Podge. And I want to make sure that I'm getting it underneath where I have loose pieces, and then I'm going to cover the whole top. So for this first sample, I'm going to let it dry a little bit so that it's not sticky on the top, and then I'm going to add a little bit of weight, some books or something, just to press everything a little flatter. So I'm going to mark my next sample, and I'm going to repeat the process for the Mod Podge application. But instead of letting it air dry, I'm going to go ahead and press it with my iron to help dry it faster, and also to hopefully press the glue into the fabric a little bit better. For sample number 2, I've done a little hair drying, and it's still wet, but it's not tacky. So for this sample, I have some parchment paper here, and I'm just protecting both sides of the material so I can protect my tabletop and also my iron. So I'm going to flip this parchment paper over the top. You don't want to use a waxy paper for this ironing portion. And I'm just using my iron on a wool setting, and I'm just going to press this from both sides until I get it dry. So for this sample, I've ironed it for maybe a couple of minutes, and I flipped it over a couple of different times, and I can still feel a lot of heat in the fabric itself, so I'm just going to let it cool. And once it's cooled off, I'll go ahead and peel this paper off. So I have to confess, after my first 2 samples, I was a little bit disappointed with my results, and I decided I was going to need to do a lot more testing. So I pulled out a few more products to test. So bear with me while I run through some more tests, and I'll be back with my results and hopefully some top picks that I think will work to make the fabric. So I have 11 different samples here to talk about, and I'm going to start with the things that I tested that I really don't think worked well. So these are the 3 results that I just really wouldn't recommend doing, and a couple of them I used a 50-50 mix of Mod Podge matte and fabric softener, because I thought that the fabric softener might help the texture of the samples somewhat. And I have to say that these are some of the crispier samples that I ended up with. And also, visually, they're not great either. You can see where some of that extra glue kind of made a more shiny spot on the fabric, and they're kind of scratchy and stiff. So this one was just an air dry sample, and this one I ironed dry, and you can see that it has even more of that kind of discoloring where there was a little excess glue. For this sample, I used the matte Mod Podge also, and I thought that if I sprayed the denim with a little bit of water ahead of time, that might help the glue go into the denim a little more smoothly. But you can see that I still have that discolored look to the denim. And also this is a very stiff sample as well. So even watering down the glue a little bit made the sample ironically stiffer. So this side was ironed dry, and then on this side I iron dried the whole thing, and on this side I went back and put an additional coat of Mod Podge matte, which does help smooth out the look a little bit, and it does make it a little bit smoother, but it's still again very crispy looking and feeling sample. So this isn't, I wouldn't recommend watering down the glues, which I thought would maybe make the fabric softer, but it's actually made it crisper. The next 2 samples I wanted to talk about were just sort of an odd, fun experiment, and I don't think these are going to work for the application that I'm trying to achieve today, but they have made me kind of intrigued to try them maybe in some other projects. So this first one is made with just laying a layer of Mod Podge matte over the top. So to make the film, I made like 4 layers of Mod Podge onto a wax paper sheet that I could just peel it off of, and I laid it on top and just ironed it on. So this first side, I used a wool and cotton setting for most of my ironing, and then for the second side, I bumped the heat up and the time up. So this was actually a linen setting for a full minute of ironing. And I think on this Mod Podge sample, the hotter iron and a little longer time did actually help. This sample is a similar idea where I just used hot glue and I ironed the glue between some parchment paper and then laid the film over the top of this sample as well. Now the hot glue definitely darkens up the denim. It makes everything much darker. And this one, again, on this side I used a hotter iron, and you can see that it did push out some of the hot glue, which I just couldn't trim off the edge. But I'm kind of intrigued by this sample from a standpoint of maybe using it on flat fabric, not on layered fabrics, to sort of add a rubbery effect to the fabric. So that brings us to our glue samples, and I did use the matte Mod Podge and the gloss Mod Podge. And I also tested out this Aleene's permanent fabric glue. There are, of course, tons of other products that you could test, but these are the 3 that I had, so these are the ones that I tested out. And I tested all 3 of them a few different ways. So these first samples, this is my Mod Podge matte, gloss, and the Aleene's. And on these samples, I iron dried the whole sample, and on the B side I added an additional coat of the finish, whichever finish it was. So on this matte Mod Podge version, it definitely accentuates where you have extra glue, so you probably aren't going to want that type of finish. When you do put a second coat on, it does clean that up quite a bit, and this side was just, the second coat was just air dried, so you still have that additional air dry time. And you end up with a little bit stiffer fabric just because you're putting the additional bit of glue on there. But I think if you were looking for a sort of stiffer fabric, that the iron dry with a second coat of air dry Mod Podge would certainly work. The gloss Mod Podge iron version did not adapt quite as well when I put the second coat on. It's still not the best result. And the same with the Aleene's. You can definitely see where there was extra glue on these samples. So my final samples, I think all of these would be suitable for a sort of a stiffer fabric. They are holding together well, and they have a fairly nice look and a fairly nice hand to them. So the first one is the matte Mod Podge, and this is just air dried. And you can't see this on screen maybe, but there is a little bit of discoloration where there's extra glue. And this side is pretty rough. But on this other side, after the glue was air dried, I went back and ironed it with a wool setting or cotton setting just for a few minutes. And it does really improve the hand of the fabric and the visual look of the fabric. You can see that it gets rid of that sort of weird shininess that I have on this side. And it's actually got a better flexibility and hand to it once you press that dried glue into the fabric a little bit. This sample I used the gloss Mod Podge and I let it air dry, and this side I went back and ironed, and honestly I can feel a little bit of a difference, but I don't see much of a difference at all. So I think in some ways the gloss Mod Podge is a better choice for this than the matte. So this is the Aleene's fabric glue, and it's got the softest hand of all of them, And there is not a real noticeable difference on the side that I went back and ironed after the sample was air dried. So I'm trying to make this fabric for a hat project, so I need a stiffer fabric. So I think that any of these products will work for that project. But of course, the final test is a wash test. So I'm going to throw them all in the washer and dryer, and then I'll be back for one final evaluation. All right, so I quickly wanted to show you my wash results, and these two were ones that I had already kind of kicked out. I didn't think they were great because I mixed them with the fabric softener and the Mod Podge matte, and you can see that they didn't really even stay together. So these didn't even make it into the dryer because they fell apart in the wash. This one was the Mod Podge matte with the denim sprayed to dampen it before I put it on, and it didn't make it through the wash either, so that one didn't go in the dryer. And this is what happened to the film sheet version, so I kind of wish I hadn't thrown it in the washer. It's definitely not a washable finish, but it was kind of cool before I tried to wash it. Then these samples were the ones that I just put the glue and air dried them. So this is the Mod Podge matte, and it came through pretty well. I will say I think maybe washing it did alleviate some of that extra glue on the side that I didn't go back and iron. This is the side that I did iron, and it, you know, I may not have gotten enough glue under there, but there is a few loose spots now from washing it. This is the gloss Mod Podge sample, and it held together really well. You can see on the one side that it's pulled away from the fusible interfacing, but the pieces themselves are stuck together very well on both sides. The Aleene's I was kind of surprised about because it seems to have fallen apart the most. These were washed and then dried in a very low heat dryer for just like 20 minutes. Because I didn't want to overdo it. So I was pretty surprised that the Aleene's seemed to fall apart more than either of the Mod Podge versions. So I just wanted to jump back on real quick and apologize for my Aleene's washed sample, because I did let mine dry for 24 hours, which is what the instructions say, but they also say you're not supposed to launder it for 7 to 10 days. So I probably would have gotten a better result if I had waited longer to wash my sample. And then here again I have Mod Podge matte, Mod Podge gloss, and the Aleene's, and these were the ones that I ironed dry and then added a second coat of the finish. And I would say hands down that the Mod Podge matte looks the best. Both the Aleene's and the gloss have a lot of weird shimmer to them, and you can see where the extra glue is. But all of these samples did hold together very well through the wash and the dry, so they might warrant a little bit more testing. And the surprise finish was the hot glue. I was kind of afraid to throw it in the washer and the dryer, but it came through just fine. Again, I did use a very low heat in the dryer. And on the side that I used the hotter iron, you can see that there's a lot of damage and there's some loose denim here. But the side that I used the wool setting on to melt the glue into the fabric is kind of a nice, supple, rubbery fabric finish. So that's it for today's experimenting. Of course, there's tons of other experiments you could run, and I don't think I found the perfect solution, but I do think there are a couple of things that would work for some of the projects that I have in mind. If you need more information on any of the techniques, just drop me a comment in the comments section and I'll try to answer those questions. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.